All right, let's see. We have a couple of questions that were already received through Instagram and Twitter and all that kind of stuff. And the first question is, I want a DAW that can render out a mono file at one click. I'll look no further than Studio One, because that's obviously possible. And I'm going to show you that right now. So let's go to a completely new song. And let's just drag in anything from a file browser, basically. Let's see, what do we have? Maybe some loops. How about this one? Sounds pretty stereo to me. And as we can see, this is clearly a stereo file. Now, how can we make a mono file from this with one click? Well, it's incredibly easy. You can just click on this symbol here, this channel mode symbol with the with these two circles that are going into each other. And then you just press that once. Now the file is mono. And if you want to render that down, you can just do Control B on a Mac or I'm sorry, Command and B on a Mac or Control and B on a Windows PC. And as you can see, that has been rendered into a mono file right away. So that's pretty easy. What you can also do from the Files tab, if you have you know, a couple of samples like I do, you can just right-click anything and then split it to mono files right from here. And after you've done that, you can import that into your session and keep working with it. So that'd be the first one answered. Can I group tracks in the mixer is a question from Lionel Thomas. It looks like it's not working. Yeah, you can absolutely group tracks in the mixer. And not just that, you can also determine what exactly it is that you want to link with these group options that we have since Studio One version 4.5. So let me once again go to a song. And we are just going to create a couple of audio tracks right here. And let's go to the mixer. And let's say we want to group track 1 to 4, but we only want to group them for volume and panning. I still want to be able to insert something on track 1, and it's not going to insert on all the other ones that I've currently selected. Let's say that is something that we want to do. Well, that's exactly what these groups allow us to do. So we can either right-click and group the selected tracks, or we can just hit Command and G on a Mac or Control and G on a Windows PC. And as soon as they're grouped, they're going to show up down here where it says Show Groups, the channel list. And once you have that open, you can right-click it. And here you can say exactly what you want to group for this. All right. So in this case, I just want to have volume and panning looped, but nothing of the other ones. So now you can see the panning is looped, the volume as well. But I should still be able to insert something here like so, without it being inserted in all the other tracks. Yes, indeed. Let's see which other questions we have. I have to scroll a little bit up. Hi from Louisiana. Hope you guys are doing great. Hang in there. It's going to get better soon, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm glad we fixed that audio in the very beginning. Sorry about that once again. Ach, Joe, making my day. How wonderful. All right, let's see. What else do we have from Instagram over here? That's an interesting question. That's a bit more advanced, but I love that question. How to trigger sidechain compression through MIDI notes. And in case you're not familiar with sidechain, sidechain is essentially a technique that can be used for mixing purposes, or it can also be used for creative, intentional purposes. What that essentially means, in the most prominent example, I would say, for compressor, is that instead of listening to the own signal chain, it's going to listen to a sidechain from another signal, and that will determine whether gain reduction is happening or not. And yeah, the most popular example from electronic dance music would be that the bass gets reduced in gain by the kick drum coming from the sidechain. But you can also sidechain something without you actually hearing the source. You only hear the effect. And that is something that is very, very cool. Has some great creative possibilities. And you can do it with a nifty little trick in Studio One that I'm also going to show you in my next video coming up for YouTube. But maybe as a sneak peek, I'm going to show you that right now. So I have a little session prepared here. Ghost sidechaining. And you can see that I have a compressor here for my bass and my pad. And they're both getting sidechained by the kick drum. Let's listen to what we got. I hope you can hear that okay. Yeah, you can clearly hear how the kick drum is basically sidechaining the bass and the pad here. But now what if I want to have these sidechained without actually hearing the kick drum? And this is where we have to talk about ghost outputs in Studio One, because you can assign additional outputs even if they don't have an analog out. So even if you don't have additional outputs on your interface, you can still use ghost outputs to your advantage. For that, you go to Song Setup, and you go to the Outputs tab, and you're just going to add another output here. And this is really important if you don't have all these outputs like I do have with my Quantum here. You can just disable it like this and hit Apply. This is essentially an output now that doesn't have any how should I say, any destination. It's just for our internal routing purposes, as you're going to see in just a sec. And now I'm going to call this None, because this is not really an output, right? So we're just going to call it None. And you're going to see why I do this in just a moment. Now I go to my kick drum track, and I can either duplicate it, or for a demonstrational sake, I'm just going to leave it as is, but I change the master output to None. So now I can't hear that kick drum anymore, right? Because it's going into an output that doesn't exist, but it's still going to the bass and the pad through the sidechain. That's still happening. So here are my kick drum notes, as you can see right here. And now it still gets sidechained even though you can't hear the kick drum anymore. And if I still want to keep the kick drum, I could of course just duplicate that track. And now I can get really creative with this. I can just, draw in some extra notes here and here, just see what works, what doesn't. And that's one of the ways you can work with ghost outputs in Studio One. There's many other ways that you can utilize this, but this would be a way to achieve ghost sidechaining through MIDI notes. Teach us how to use a compressor. Yeah, why not? That's a topic that I really, really like, because I feel that compressors are very often quite misunderstood. So let me just open up maybe a compressor for this kick drum here. I'm just going to route that back to the master. I'm just going to add the Studio One compressor right here, because this is a really nice compressor when it comes to learning what this dynamics effect actually does. It comes with the main parameters that you're going to find on most compressors out there, and that is attack, release, ratio, and threshold. Those are the four parameters that you have to learn on each and every compressor, basically. So the threshold is essentially saying if the level is not higher than the threshold I've set, the compressor is not going to do anything, okay? So the compression is basically only reducing the level that manages to make it above the threshold. So for instance, if I have a threshold of -20 and my signal only reaches -21, the compressor doesn't do anything. If I have a signal that is -19, then I would get at maximum a gain reduction of 1 dB, because it can only reduce in gain what is above the threshold. That's point one. Ratio means everything that passes the threshold. How strong does that get reduced in gain? And if it says 2/1, that means that everything that goes past the threshold is only half as loud. So for instance, if you have a signal that's -10 dB, or let's say for argument's sake -15 dB, then we have 5 dB that go beyond the threshold, and the ratio of 2 would mean that the 5 dB that are going above the threshold are only 2.5 now, so we have a gain reduction of 2.5. And yeah, end up with a signal that's not -15 dB, but -17.5 dB. You don't have to know this, but I think it's quite handy to know this because it's going to help you in the long run to understand what compression does better. If you just want to basically set a compressor correctly, I can also give you some tips. What I like to do is set the ratio extremely high and the threshold as well, so that the compression starts immediately and is super strong. And then I would recommend to basically put the release super low. And now you just play around with the attack until you can hear the transient of that material. There I can hear it quite all right. Let me just boost the gain so you can hear what I'm doing a bit better. Right, there's the transient back in the picture. And now I can turn up the release and bring back the threshold. And that's the way that you could adjust your compression extremely quickly. So let's see which other questions we have. Any tips for mastering tracks at the end? Yeah, sure. Maybe remind me one more time, just in case I forget. How do I use a click track for in-ear monitoring? That's also a really good question. Because when you're doing in-ear monitoring, what you would likely do is not have the click track audible for the entire playback, but only for the person perhaps who is actually recording the vocals. So it really depends on whether you're a home producer and you're just recording yourself, or whether you're actually recording with somebody else. And then I would likely do this via QMix, and I can show you how to do that right now. So if I wanted to record some vocals here on top, and I wanted to have a click for it, but I only want that click for myself, I would have to go to the audio I/O setup. And first of all, define a mono output where my microphone would be recorded from. Then I would need a separate output. And here I would basically either engage the QMix, but I actually don't have to do it. I would only need the QMix if I also want the levels to be slightly different, to have my microphone a bit louder than it actually is. Then the QMix would be very beneficial. But just for the click track, that would actually not be necessary. And then you just go to the mixer down here, and you open up the Outputs tab, and here you see that new output that we just created. And now you can just click on this click symbol here and disable it for the main out. And this is basically the global on-off for metronome. And once that's on, you can see that, or you can hear on this channel that this one has the click track, and now it doesn't. And in this case, if this was routed to what my OBS, my streaming software, is currently recorded, then you would only hear it on that output and not the other one. So this is how you could essentially have your click track just in your headphones and not on your speakers, for instance. I hope that makes sense. What was that? Not sure if you heard that one. That was quite interesting. All right, let's see. Which other questions do we have? How do I create a loop? That's also an interesting question. That probably refers to, creating a loop for a loop library or something like that. Very often you have like very strict limitations there. It can only be a 2-bar loop at a certain BPM. And I'm gonna show you all the things that are necessary for that right now. So let's go to the start page and let's choose an example here. Let's see. Maybe I go for this one. So this would be basically a loop for a 2-bar sample library where you have like, maybe 30 loops per directory that are 2 bars long, and then they have a specific BPM. In techno, it would be most of the time 123 or 128 BPM. So then you would also set your song BPM to 123 or 130. And now when I want to export this, it's really important that this loop range here is set. You can also set it automatically by just selecting the event and hitting the P key. And then you just go to Song, Export Mixdown, and what you really have to ensure is that you export the range between your loop markers, okay? Another option that's really important is that you write the tempo to audio files so that when you export this loop, it's gonna be detected at the correct BPM in any other DAW so that, you know, the preview with time stretching works correctly and things like that. And then you just wanna comply with the format of that sample library or whatever you have. Most of the time, that would be 16 or 24-bit depth at a sample rate of 44.1 kilohertz as a WAV file. What you can also do if you want to process this further in Studio One is just open up your browser like this and then go to any directory that you have. Like here I have a folder that's called Ideas that's always available on my desktop, and then I just drag it onto here. And then you can see that it's actually turning this whole thing into a music loop. Now, music loops are especially fascinating because they render an audio file that you can preview and listen to. Right now I'm playing this from the browser, as you can see. But as soon as I recall that into my project, it's not gonna be recalled as a classic audio loop that I can't really, you know, manipulate in the ways that I could manipulate a MIDI loop, but it would actually be recalled with the entire ins and outs configuration of my Impact XT preset here, with all the inserts, as well as all the used samples and their respective output configurations. And that's extremely powerful. So when I just go to a new song, like this, you can also pre-listen this at a different BPM, of course. And if I decide this is what I want, I just drag that into my project, just like that. And you will see in just a moment that it's actually recalling with all the inserts, like I said. And without any artifacts, because this is just immediate recall, right? So that's very, very powerful. Oh, there's a couple more questions coming in here. Richard has an interesting question. Hi, Gregor. Any plans for Ableton Link? Ableton Link would be really cool indeed, but there's already quite some nifty stuff possible today between Ableton and Studio One. For instance, what you can do is you can drag your wave clips from Ableton directly into Studio One, just drag and drop, that's gonna work. And then you can apply things like Melodyne or Vocaline, anything that has ARA integration that you don't have in Ableton. Take advantage of that amazing workflow without having to record anything into the buffer of these plugins. And then as soon as you're done, you just bounce it to the Studio One browser and you drag it back into Ableton. So that's a really nice workflow that's already possible between these two DAWs today that doesn't involve Link. But I agree, it would be very nice to have at some point. Oh, I see. Oh, yeah. My DSLR camera was in the way when I was showing the click tracks. Thank you for calling that out, and just gonna go back to that. That's also a nice thing about Studio One, that you always have the sessions that you had in the background still open. You don't have to basically, you know, open an entire new instance of the program like you do in certain other DAWs if you want to open another song simultaneously. So let me just drag that away. So hopefully now you should be able to see it. It's a bit ghetto, I apologize for that. And as soon as you click on output, you see this is all the separate outputs that I have in this session. In our example, I think we only had one headphone output like that. And we just remove the ones that we don't need right now. And here you can see I have now a headphones output and my master output. And if I want to have the click only on that one, I just disengage or toggle off this click symbol here and click on it here instead. So now I would have the click on my headphones, but not on my speakers. I hope that's a bit more clear. All right, so far so good. Let's see what other questions we have. Show us some tricks for swing, shuffle, and groove templates. My very pleasure. That's one of my favorite topics to talk about, as some of you might know. So we're going to go to the groove maps, and I'm going to show you a very basic example of this. It's going to take a little sip of my green energy drink here. That's just fruits. And as you can see, I have two different MIDI parts here. One is in green and one is in red. And riddle me this, guys. Let's say I want to have the velocity progression that I have on the green one on the red event, but I only want to copy over the velocities and neither the pitches, nor the note positions, nor the lengths of this, right? Because you can see these are quite different. The red one is a bit longer in note values in the beginning, and pretty much everything is different about these. And let's say I just want to copy the velocities over. And that's where we are going to work with these groove maps that you find when you click on the Q button here and then switch from the grid to the groove page like this. So now what you can do is just grab any guide groove that you want, and that's going to be applied to anything else. And you can even save that as a preset, which I find incredible. So I'm just going to take the green one that has the velocity progression that I like. I drag that to the groove box here. And now I can say, what do I want to apply on this other event? Do I want to apply the start point? That would be like the start quantization. Do I want to apply the end, which would mean the note length, or just the velocity? And in my case, I just want to have the velocity. By the way, this can also be set gradually. So that would be a very nice thing to add a little bit of unquantized, humanized swing to your event. But in this case, for demonstrational purposes, I'm going to set this to 100%. And now pay close attention to what happens here. Right? See? The notes stayed exactly where they were, but only the velocities changed, and as you can see, they're exactly identical with these ones. And like I said, if I like this velocity, and that's my standard velocity progression for hi-hats and stuff like that, I can just click on this plus here, and that would save it as a preset. In fact, I've actually gone ahead and basically extracted the groove from several old drum machines, old and new. More modern ones like the Analog Rhythm, but also some classics like the 808 and 909. And those I can apply instantly to any track to add a little bit of swing to it. If you want to hear what this would sound like, I have another example for that. So let me just open up one example where I can demonstrate this quite clearly. It's probably this one. Yeah, so listen to this one. And especially this lead sound here. So this lead sound, if you pay close attention, that's basically just 8 notes that are being played with 100% quantization. So it sounds a bit robotic almost. And that plays together with a bass that has a lot more swing to it. It's a little bit unquantized, and they don't really play nicely together. Have a listen. So if I want that lead to follow that bass, all I have to do is just take the bass, drag that to the groove box like before, and then just apply the quantization to my lead by setting the start to 100%, selecting the lead event, and hitting apply. Now listen to this. Before it was like this. Right, doesn't really listen to what the bass is playing at all. So that is another really nice way to use groove maps and get some swing into that. What else? yeah, let me show you one more thing where you can use these groove maps, and that is when you want to do sound replacements. I know a couple of people, they're using quite expensive solutions, even though they have Studio One, and it's not necessary because we have sample replacement already built right into our software and it's sample accurate. So let me show you how that's done. So I'm gonna go to my sound replacement with groove maps here, and I have a little live drum recording that's not exactly on the grid, and it should keep the human feel that it has, but the kick and the snare are kind of weak, and I would like to amp them a bit with a sample. Have a listen. Right, the kick and the snare are sounding a little bit dull, and that's why I have an Impact XT loaded up here with a kick sample and a snare to just, you know, help give that a little bit more beef. Now these have to play exactly at the same point in time as the original recording, because otherwise I could, in the best case scenario, hear that it has been layered, and in the worst case scenario, hear actual phase issues being introduced into the mix. So how do I do it now? Well, it's exactly the same procedure. Now I take my kick drum and I just drag that to the groove box here. And as soon as I've done that, I can now just drag it out of the groove box or directly from the event, both works. And here, just drag it down here to my Impact XT. As soon as I've done that, all I need to do is just set this to the pitch on which I have currently my sample. And that's very easy. Just select all of these and go to Action and then Transpose. I like doing it with a hotkey because it's just way faster, like this. And I'm gonna say set all of them to C1, like this. Okay, so let's have a listen without and with. I hope you can hear that's already a lot more beef on the kick. And let's see how quick this is if I don't spend most of my time explaining it. So I just take the snare, drag that to here, drag it down here, set that to whichever note I have my snare sample on, which is D1, and that's it. Without these two, and with. So that is a really, really nice way of using groove maps for sample replacement. Richard Hargrave already has a follow-up question, a very good follow-up question, and that is, how do we adjust the transient detection in case that doesn't work automatically? So that's an excellent question, and for that you can go to this menu over here, the audio band menu. As soon as you're here, you can set the threshold for these band markers by, you know, lowering it. It's gonna see or detect less of these, and the higher you go, the more it's gonna detect. And what Studio One is essentially doing is then just translate these band marker transients into MIDI notes, right? So you can see if I drag this down here, it's becoming another audio track, but if I drag that to an empty instrument track, then it's actually becoming MIDI notes, and those I can use to layer my samples. Speaking of audio to MIDI, maybe one more thing I can show to you guys is how you can use Melodyne to get your ideas into your songs without having to play it from a MIDI keyboard or stuff like that. Because I know a lot of musicians who are way more expressive when they play guitar or when they can use their voice, and they have a hard time translating what they're coming up with these instruments into the DAW when they have to use a MIDI device. So fortunately, we can use a very similar technique of audio to MIDI to make that happen. So for that, I have a little example here, and it's called, I think it's called Voice Note to MIDI. Yes, exactly, because this one, and that is a true story, I was just humming it into my iPhone, my voice memos. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that app. I think Voice Notes it's called. And then I just airdropped that to my Mac Mini and dragged it from there into Studio One. And this is what it sounds like raw. And please bear with me, I'm a bit of a singer myself. Da 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 da. Beautiful, isn't it? But that's not the point. The point is that I wanted to have this translated into MIDI to keep working with it. So what you can do is just right-click it, and then go to Audio and edit with Melodyne, or what I prefer to do is Command and M on a Mac or Control and M on the Windows PC. Now that's basically transformed into MIDI notes. Da. Just gonna make sure this one's gonna be detected correctly. And now I can just drag that onto an empty MIDI track where I have loaded up a synthesizer. And now that's gonna play exactly what I was singing here. And that would of course also work if you had a guitar, you were playing something from your guitar, edit it with Melodyne, and then you can just drag it onto an empty instrument track or an instrument track that's loaded up with a VST instrument. And it's gonna play exactly what you played with your guitar, which can be perfect for layering or even replacing. Is there any way to sidechain to an Impact XT in a multi-instrument? Yeah, you can sidechain into anything you want with the technique that I was showing earlier. 124 people watching, what? That's insane. We never had this many people, I think. Thank you guys so much for watching. It's awesome. Stuttering a bit because I'm so speechless. Let's see, what other questions do we have here? Oh, that's a cool one. How can I use pattern to make my drum parts more interesting? Okay, that's also a great question. I love that question. So let me just go to this project here that I played a little earlier. And this is a quite predictable beat. It's atmospheric, but it doesn't really have something unique to it yet. And let's say I want to make that less predictable in as little amount of time as possible. So then I would just right-click this, go to Instrument Parts, and then convert this part to a pattern. Now a pattern at first sight looks similar and sounds the same to the part that we heard initially. But now I can do certain things to this that I'm unable to do with a classic part. For instance, each of these drum elements that I have here can be assigned to a different step length. So if I want to add this rim shot here, I can set this to 3 steps instead of 32, and that means that it's only gonna play 3 of these guys and then start over, while everything else has to play 32. This has a couple of implications. One of them being that it always plays at a slightly different point in time. It's almost random and unpredictable, but not quite. So let's see what this sounds like before. And now with just one rim shot being added, already so much more interesting, right? I could also set my hi-hat here to 2, and then get some hi-hats going on for that really quickly. Can also set a probability that these are actually playing to something like 50%. Or 40%. There's already so much more variation in this, right? Just a couple random ones. And then I can just drag that out for as long as I want it to be. And with the G key, I can get that back into my classic part. And now all the randomness that I had on the hi-hat is rendered down. You can see that there's, you know, sometimes a hi-hat added on the first beat, sometimes not. Like, for example, here. And this is just such a cool way to get more unpredictability into your grooves. What I can also do before I convert this back is just set up the swing and increase that a bit. And what that does is, if you watch the notes up here, it's gonna leave the quarter notes exactly on point, but everything in between is gonna be shifted a bit. So your kick and your snare are still gonna be super tight, but all the percussions in between are gonna get that little bit of shuffle, human feel, right? So this is without swing, this with. almost starts bringing me back to my Berlin techno days. Is this being recorded? I would like to watch it later. Yes, it's being recorded, but unfortunately, when I tried to record this in the beginning, the video was very stuttery. So it will probably be a 360p party again on YouTube, but better than nothing, I hope. Can you explain the correlation between tracks in the project window and the tracks in the console? This could mean two things. You could either mean the tracks in the project page, but I don't think that's what you mean. What you mean is the tracks in the project window and the tracks, the channels in the mixer. And tracks and channels is a concept that gets misunderstood time and time again in Studio One. Because most DAWs go for a strict one-to-one relationship. That means I can only have as many tracks as I have channels and vice versa. But in Studio One, you can have as many tracks as you want. And the channels are always what's actually available from your audio tracks and VST instruments. This seems a bit confusing at first, but it has a couple of really cool flexibilities that it gives you. And I can show you that right now. So let's open up, let's see, maybe this one, the Ghost sidechaining one, or let's see, what else do I have? Let's go for this one. So that's one of my latest productions that I was working on. Gonna take a little bit of time to load. And because I don't have this strict relationship of channels and tracks, what I can do when I, have, for instance, the snare here, or something like this hi-hat, and I say, hey, I would like to hear what this would sound like if this was actually, let's say, the kick drum instead of the hi-hat. Well, in most other DAWs, what I would have to do is cut this out, get this on my kick drum track, get some space here. And here I can just reassign these MIDI notes to another instrument, like so. Here, to my kick. And that way I don't have to move stuff around in my arrangement so much. I can just see what works and what doesn't. What it also allows me to do, and maybe that makes it a bit more clear than such a massive project, is I can just have an Impact XT, just one track, and compose all of my drums in there pretty much. Or let me just open up the this one again that we were just working on. As you can see, I'm recording and basically sequencing all of my drums in just this one track here. But when I open up my mixer, I have up to 8 outputs that are allowing me to separate the kick from the clap, from the cymbals, from the percussions. And I want to be able to do that without having to compose my drums necessarily in 8 different tracks. I want to compose them in one track, but still have the full mixing control. So that's why we don't have this strict one-to-one relationship. But it can be confusing sometimes to beginners, because what often happens is that they want to add something like a PreSonus XT, like maybe, let's go for any kind of preset here, maybe the Studio Grand, like so. And they just add a couple of MIDI notes here and there. Right? And then they want to put this onto another instrument track like so, that they also want to assign to the PreSonus. And now they want to search for a different preset, like maybe an organ. And now they're hoping that they would hear that piano together with the organ, but they only end up with the organ. And that is because they still have only one instrument and 2 tracks that are assigned to the same instrument. So if you want to have you know, a new independent channel, what you would either have to do is to duplicate this instrument entirely with duplicate track complete. You can see there's now second presence being added, or simply drag and drop it from the browser, and that's gonna handle that assignment for you. And that is also one of the reasons that we promote drag and drop so much, because it's the most intuitive way to work in Studio One, and also it will have the results that you expect. So rather than creating an instrument track by hand, which is very clunky because then you have to assign it manually, just drag and drop your new instrument from the browser and all that assignment is handled for you. So that's definitely the way to go, I would say. I've been to a lot of 360p parties already. All right, let's see if I have a couple more questions here. So many questions coming in here. Let's see, do you guys still have some questions? Is there a way to render the output of a track with MIDI effects to a plain instrument track? Yeah, there is, absolutely. So I think what he's relating to is the outputs of my Impact XT, for instance. So let's just go back to that really quickly. And what he wants to do, if I understand correctly, is basically freeze or transform so that it stops eating up all the processing power, but only for a specific channel of the speed. Let's say for this kick drum, for instance. That's definitely possible. What you have to do then is just right-click it, and then you go to Transform to Audio Track. And now you have to be wary or aware of this tick box here, Render All Channels. When it's disengaged, only the outputs that are assigned in the track inspector are rendered. What are outputs assigned in the track inspector? Well, that is basically this one. Okay, so right now this is set to kick. If I wanted this to render only the snare or the clap, I would set this to clap. Okay. And when I then do transform to audio track, not render all channels, only the assigned one, I would end up transforming the kick drum. Okay. If I want to have all channels, that's also possible. Then I just tick this box, render all channels. And that's going to give me 8 tracks in total, as you can see. What I can also do, and that's probably the preferred method in this case, just add another instrument track. Okay, and you assign that other instrument track to the same instrument at the same channel, and then you just transform that one. Okay, so as soon as I transform this, it will only render the output assigned in the track inspector, which is kick. So now I have the kick drum here and everything else up here, essentially. Okay, so you have basically any configuration that you want. This is witchcraft. Can that pattern send MIDI out to a hardware drum machine? Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I had another question here. How do you work with your external synthesizers that I see in the background? That's also a really good question. And I have a quantum for that, because the quantum interface range from PreSonus allows me to do this with the lowest possible latency. And I have a little demo prepared here with my trusty beloved Pro 2 from Dave Smith that you see in the background. And when I record my external instruments, what I like to do is to add one instrument track that I assign to it and one audio track that I use for the monitoring. So essentially I have one MIDI track to send out the MIDI notes, and I have an audio track to capture the resulting audio. And one thing that I do then is show the track and the channel list, which you can do by clicking on these 4 stacked horizontal lines both here above the track list and here in the channel list. And then I make sure that I don't see the audio track in my track list, and I only see it here in my mixer, because that's just a matter of keeping things tidy, right? I want to see the MIDI notes that I'm composing for this instrument here, and the resulting audio, I don't need to see that right away unless I bounce it, okay? I only want to have that here to apply some effects as I'm monitoring it. I find that more handy than having, you know, both visible here at the same time, because that's always kind of clunky, right? So let me just play what I got really quickly. And in case you're wondering, I always like to leave one bar of pre-roll so that essentially I make sure that the MIDI clock of this external synthesizer is catching up and has enough time to, you know, get in sync with my DAW project. So now I can just sequence from here, but I can still mix from the console, add a little bit of sidechain to it, like so. And as soon as it's time to render this, I can just do the trick from before, Command B or Control B on a Windows PC, which we used for virtual instruments. And then we get this really cool drop-down menu, essentially, where we can choose our record input. In this case, it's the Pro 2. Then we can just make sure that we actually have the correct level. That looks healthy. And the only thing I now have to do is reset that sequence, so it starts from part 1, essentially. And then I just record this onto a new audio track, like this. And as soon as that's done, I can essentially hide or delete this. And that way I try to keep just one instrument in my arrangement visible, even though I have to do it with 2 channels, or 1 track and 1 channel. One more thing that you're gonna find when you work a lot with external instruments like that is that MIDI is a very unpredictable thing. And that has to do with it having such low system priority from computers. They don't really think that MIDI is all that important if the CPU is required by something else, that you're always getting a little bit of MIDI jitter in there. It's always got to be a certain offset, and it's determined by so many factors. It's determined by which USB hub you're using, whether you're going straight via MIDI into your interface, or if you're going, you know, a different route, USB MIDI and stuff like that. And one way I like to record my, or align my recordings of my external instruments is with a macro. And you're gonna find this on Exchange. I'm gonna show you how you can get that for yourself in just a sec. But just so you see what it does, I have basically the issue here that this was a bit too early, right? I wanna align that exactly on point. I just select this event and I click on the line recording, and as soon as I do that, that's, as you can see, perfect. Right, so that's just one click to get my external instrument exactly on the grid. And that way I don't have to move it around manually and all these kind of things. And if you want to have that for yourself, then you just go to the Clouds tab over here and you log into PreSonus Exchange by just clicking Sign In. And as soon as you've done that, you can just search with Command and F, Align Recording. As soon as you search for that, you're going to find it, and you can install it and then just add it to your macro section over here or assign it to a hotkey. If you don't know how to assign a macro to your macro toolbar up here, you can just right click anywhere where there's already a button or group, and then you click on New Button, and that can be assigned like this to Align Recording. And then you have that available at all times to make your old MIDI gear sync up really, really nicely with the rest of your arrangement. And then I can just copy over all the insert effects that I use on my monitoring channel, as well as the send effects, get rid of that monitoring channel by just showing it here, and then getting rid of it like so. And there you go. And what I like to do then is, because I don't want to do this every time in every situation, I just want to have this ready to go when I'm inspired, is just keep this project nice and handy. I'm just going to delete these ones. And then when I open up a new song, I go to Song, import song data. And then I just navigate to my song folder here where it says record external synthesizers. And then I can double click the song file. And now I say, okay, I want these 2 Pro 2 tracks with everything. Hit OK. I'm going to hide that one. And I'm ready with the exact same configuration as before. I hope that wasn't too confusing for you guys. Probably for people who've never worked with external instruments before, this was a little bit fast and a little bit confusing to understand. But very soon, I'm going to show you how to work with external instruments from scratch. Talk you from the very beginning to the very end. Show you how to set everything up, how to connect your cables, and then hopefully it becomes a bit more understandable then. All right. Let's see. My music sounds very German. Yeah, that's shouldn't be too surprising to you, should it? Okay, do we have any other questions, or do we look good here? I think that's it, and we're pretty much done for today, I would say. It was pretty much exactly 1 hour, and thank you guys so much for your attention. It was super fun once more. If you want to see more of this, then please let us know that you enjoyed this in the comments. Leave a like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. It really helps. And hope to see you soon at the Studio One meetups. If you want to know what kind of e-meetups are happening in your area, go to PreSonus.com/events. That's PreSonus.com/events. And if you want to start one yourself, they're super fun and the best way to get in touch directly with us. Then just write an email to s1meetups@PreSonus.com. That's s1meetups@PreSonus.com. Thank you so much and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.